people hire a software to do a job. This is something that's really important to understand, that like they just want to get something done. And my job was to understand what is that thing they want to get done and how they wanted to get done with like minimal pain, minimal suffering, minimal time.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Confessions of a B2B Marketer podcast. And I first have to apologize for the slightly inadequate audio quality. I'm actually using my MacBook microphone, which is obviously inferior to the normal Blue Yeti sound quality. That will be fixed next time. And in today's episode, we're going to be jumping into an interview I did a little bit of time ago with an awesome guy called Omar Zenhom. Now, Omar is the founder and CEO of WebinarNinja, which is a quite interesting webinar SaaS product that has been growing pretty incredibly over the past 4 to 5 years. When we did this interview, they were on approximately $640,000 MRR, completely bootstrapped. And it's a beautiful example of how you should bootstrap a company. And actually, after the interview, I'm going to be kind of breaking down why I love this story, what I think WebinarNinja have done incredibly well, and how you can kind of replicate that. But first, we have to give a shout out to another reviewer. This is to Daniel Ramsey, who says, Tom, this is one of the most honest podcasts I've ever listened to. Thank you so much for sharing so much. So thank you so much for that, Daniel, who is in Canada. Thank you, Daniel. So, of course, if you're able to leave a review, preferably on Apple Podcasts, that would be amazing. I'll get you read out with a shout out to you / your business in the intro to a future show. So let's actually jump in right now to that discussion with Omar, where we dig into how they started the business and how they've grown WebinarNinja to what must be close to now $1 million in MRR with no outside funding. Welcome, Omar.
So a little bit of background. The article we wrote about Omar and WebinarNinja was really focusing on how they've built a SaaS business that I believe really solved the need of the people that they were aiming for, which kind of left the whole marketing thing almost irrelevant, because they built this product that really, really solved a problem that people had running webinars. And so we wrote the article about how they've focused on a couple of things that the previous competitors didn't do very well, and communicate that very clearly on their site. So we're going to jump a little bit deeper into that in the next 20 minutes. Omar, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
And I'd also like to highlight that Omar has a massive, long-standing podcast called the $100 MBA. I don't know if you know, Omar, but in about 2016 or 17, I recorded a guest episode of your podcast where I taught about hiring virtual assistants, I believe.
Wow. So you're familiar with the show, and I love the fact that you've contributed to our audience. So thanks, man.
Yeah. And so the first thing I want to dive into is how because $100 MBA has been running for like 6 years, right?
Correct.
So you have built up a significant audience in kind of the online entrepreneur space. So you almost did that first, had the attention, and then you've now built a product that solved the problem for them. Was that like a conscious thing that you did? Or did you start the podcast and then realize actually there's a big need here?
It's probably one of the only conscious things I did in my entrepreneurial journey. And it was like a light bulb moment for me, because I was watching a video interview of Seth Godin, and he mentioned in passing, and sort of like in a joke, like one of the easiest ways to become successful is to become famous. And people laughed and the audience laughed, but he was like, I'm serious, actually. Like, you really don't have anything without an audience. And it just kind of illustrated, or I would say articulated my pain point at the moment. At the moment, I had an online course called the $100 MBA, which delivered video content, video training to those who want to learn the basics of business to start an online business. And I was struggling to get memberships because, again, I don't have anybody to talk to. My email list was weak. I had no audience. And if you talk to any struggling entrepreneur, it's probably their number one pain. You speak to highly qualified developers that create these great apps, but they don't get any traction and they give up. It's because they don't have an audience. It's because you just have nobody to talk to, nobody to, there's only so much you could sell to your friends and family, So it was a very conscious choice. And in fact, we actually launched a podcast before the $100 MBA show, which was a total failure. We learned a whole bunch of lessons in that whole exercise. But we were really, we really believed in the medium of podcasting as podcast listeners. I say we, me and my co-founder, Nicole. So, and at that second try of the $100 MBA show, really the big differentiator for us was that we focused on our strengths. So, for those who don't know, I was an educator for over 13 years, high school, university teacher. And our first podcast is an interview podcast. And we had some great guests, and it was, fun to meet all these wonderful entrepreneurs. But Nicole and I are horrible at interviewing. It was just not doing well at all. And we really wanted to build a large audience that we can, build a business on. And I think our best episode, still on iTunes, our best episode maybe got like a little under 400 downloads or something like that. And, which is fine. And it's not, but that was not really our goal. It's not really what we were trying to do. And then when we relaunched, we kind of started a new podcast, the $100 MBA show. We really analyzed, why didn't that work? And it really boiled down to two things. Number one, we were really focusing on our strengths, which is, we both have, great experience in teaching. Why am I interviewing people? I should be teaching on this podcast. And we really didn't see any other podcasts that taught lessons in business. It was usually, whether it's discussion and banter or an interview podcast. And we really like the model of language learning, Coffee Break French, Coffee Break Spanish, which are popular language learning podcasts. And we thought, no one's really doing this in business, teaching business lessons. And that was the second thing that we did right, which is differentiate in a way that adds value to the marketplace, where people are like, I don't have much time to maybe get into an hour backstory, which is great. I love long form podcasts. I listen to a whole bunch of them. But you got to be able to fulfill the needs of other people, and that's what the show kind of did, and kind of took off from when we launched it in August 2014.
And just for the listeners, what is the format, like length of episode, posting frequency of the podcast that you've maintained over the years?
Yeah, it's a daily podcast, 5 days a week, and it's the content's about 10 to 15 minutes long. And it's a very concise yet very practical business lesson on a particular topic. It could be Facebook ads, it could be making your first hire, it could be how to know how much to pay yourself as as a solopreneur, that type of stuff. So what people really love about it is that it's enough for them to consume an episode or two on their commute, and they have something actionable to do immediately after the episode. And that's kind of how we got the following through really just delivering a good show. I know it's funny that at the end of the day, if you just give people something good, that usually works.
Which is kind of what you've done with Webinar Ninja again, but let's wait till we get there. So you had this podcast, the audience was growing. I presume you monetized in other ways before shifting to software.
So we had the course, the $100 MBA, which helped kind of finance our life because the show was growing. So therefore, it drove some traffic to the site. I have to say, it's interesting because the timing of us releasing the podcast was really difficult, but at the same time, I look back at it and it's actually pretty good timing. We launched at the same time, like Tim Ferriss launched his podcast, Startup, Serial was just coming up, and it was a really tough time to launch. A lot of competition. Shaq had a podcast and Stephen Colbert, and, I was competing with these pixels on iTunes. But we were able to kind of differentiate and be consistent enough. And it's funny because I was working so hard on just creating a great show and making sure that we get better and better. And I get better on the mic every time I recorded, that I really didn't notice that the show was growing and becoming so successful. I was looking at my numbers, here and there. But I think the moment that we realized, okay, this thing is actually a thing, like something that really resonates with people. It was Nicole and I were visiting Sydney and visiting Nicole's family in Sydney for the holidays around Christmas time. And I woke up and Nicole's like waking me up. She's like, wake up, look at your phone, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what's going on? And I'm getting these tweets and these messages, and, iTunes named us as best of iTunes, one of like the top 20 podcasts on iTunes, which was incredible for us. But for me, it was a shocker. I was like, what? We're just like this small team trying to build things and trying to make a great show and whatever. And it was just like the moment was like, okay, I guess this is good now. Sometimes you need like an external validation sometimes. And I think I was just so busy trying to create a great show that I didn't realize it was actually getting traction and a lot of listens and the attention of the iTunes editors and all that kind of stuff. And then from there, that really propelled us to get even, more exposure because of that endorsement.
The two things you mentioned that I think is so important for probably any business, but specifically content creators, is consistency and continuous improvement. Your listeners have to trust that you're going to deliver something regularly, but they also want something good, and you're going to get good by doing it and repeating and improving.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you have to be critical of yourself. You have to listen back or review your own work, and it's going to be cringeworthy. It's going to be things that are going to be hard to digest, but that means you're improving, which is good. It also means that you're keeping your ego in check, because that's always a factor when you gain any kind of success. To understand that, hey, you still have a long way to go, and this all could vanish tomorrow if you don't stay on top of it.
Yeah. So moving now towards WebinarNinja, how did you discover that there was actually a need for new webinar software?
So I was running webinars to gain new memberships to the $100 MBA program. I was running them every week, and I loved the concept of webinars. It was working. I was making sales. I was able to nurture my audience. I was able to retain customers. And the medium was very comfortable for me because of my teaching background. And I was like, wow, this concept's incredible. I could teach at mass and help people out and be able to, provide my products and services. But I was really frustrated with the software options out there. And unfortunately, there wasn't anything that was all in one. It was I had a hodgepodge of Frankenstein everything together. And I had to get, my own kind of webinar video side of things, the streaming side of things. And then I would have to build my own landing pages to get the registration page. And I had to integrate that with my email marketing software like MailChimp to get the emails. And then I had to embed my own chat. And then after it's all over, I have to grab the replay and pop it into a page I create for a replay page. I have to make sure this all works together, and I have to do this all over again every week. So it was a lot of trouble. And I was like, there's got to be an easier way to do this, And one of the first businesses I had was I was a business consultant. I used to build websites on WordPress for clients. So I know a bit of PHP, a bit of HTML, CSS. I know my way around WordPress. And I created a very small, I can't even call it a software. It was just like a hacked together tool, which was a WordPress plugin at the time, to automate that process of creating a landing page, creating a registration page, having the stream be embedded, having some sort of chat that would be able to go back and forth with my audience. And I started running webinars with it just to save myself some time, hours, every week. And I just was focused on building my audience and selling my course. And as I was running the webinars, the attendees on the webinar were like, hey, what are you using for this webinar? I was just like, just something we slapped together, to make my life easy. And they're like, well, can we buy it? And at that moment, I was like, oh man. And it's funny because I've had enough failures in business to know that, talk is cheap. People will say, I want to buy that. That's a good idea. That's a brilliant idea. But we wanted to put that idea to the test. So what we decided to do is I just created a landing page, a sales page, so to speak, of some mock-ups of what it would be like to experience the software. We put it up for pre-sale basically, and we offered actually 150 spots at the beginning, beta spots, saying, hey, you're going to purchase access to this, in a few months, no exact deadline. With the promise of a better software solution. And let me preface this where this is it was quite ugly, it was clunky, but it was just better than what was out there. And that the 150 spots sold out in 48 hours. So at that moment, we're like, okay, and I had a small email list at the time. Okay, there's some demand. Let's see if we can pre-sell a few more spots to see if we can get some more funding for the development of this. And we sold out the next 100 spots in 24 hours. So that moment, we're like, okay, we have 250 beta users. I hired a freelance developer that knows a bit more than I do to clean it up, to make it available for commercial use, to be able to sell licenses and that type of thing. And yeah, so those first 250 beta users are still around with us today. They informed the product since we've grown in the last 5 years. We're over 14,000 users, with over 1 million people have attended a webinar with WebinarNinja. So it's been a great journey. But I think I scratched my own itch. We tested how painful that pain is to see if that really needs solving, needs alleviating. Found out, we were bootstrapped, so we had to kind of collect the money first, and then again, we delivered that product, but we also allowed them to refund it if they were not happy within 60 days of us delivering the pre-sold product.
Got it. I think this is super interesting because the percentage of those 250 early customers, did they all come from your existing $100 MBA audience?
So a couple of things. Number one, I did a lot of guest posting and blogs at the time. So I had a couple of audiences I leaned on where I wrote to, so people kind of knew me. I had a small email list at the time of 3,000 people that I emailed, people that are actual buyers of $100 MBA. I was part of some forums. There still exists one called Fizzle, which is a independent business kind of training and community, and I was one of their founding members, and really helped and contributed, and just kind of mentioned, hey, I'm creating this thing, if anybody's interested in becoming a beta member, blah blah blah. So a few avenues, small community. Yeah, I know it sounds cheesy, but I think a lot of the credit that a lot of what's happened with WebinarNinja is just due to the relationships I've built over the years. In order for me to kind of be able to reach out and ask to give me a shot.
Got it. The next thing I want to cover is how I'd actually recommend anybody listening to go to webinarninja.com and look at how you communicate the value of the software on the homepage. Because you're very clear on a couple of value propositions, specifically how fast and easy it is to set up a webinar, and then like how simple it is, and then how you don't have to tie loads of stuff together. Mm-hmm. So did you know that customers resonated with those benefits before you started communicating about them?
So what we did is, number one, at the very start, I just relied on, a few years ago, I used to rely on just my own experience as the first user of WebinarNinja and my pain points. But I realized, after a couple years, I became a very pro user because I know the product very well. I run a lot of webinars, to date now I've run over 500 webinars. So I'm not the typical user anymore. So I can't use my own language. I can't use my own perceptions. So we would actually read customer reviews that would come back from customer support. I would look at what they love about the support, about the product, use the same language that they use the same kind of phrasing. We actually reached out to all our more avid users that have been with us for a while and asked them to shoot us a recording of what you love about the product, why you continue to use the product, just so I can understand the personas, understand who they are, understand what we really provide. And at the end of the job, people hire a software to do a job. This is something that's really important to understand, that they just want to get something done. And my job was to understand what is that thing they want to get done and how they wanted to get done with minimal pain, minimal suffering, minimal time, that kind of thing. So it was a combination of just listening to, what our customers are saying when they're not being asked, when they are asked, and just using the same language that they use when they articulate how they describe WebinarNinja. Because they say that word of mouth is the best, sales tool, and you want to use the same words that they use when they recommend to their friends, and you want to be able to, leverage it on your sales pages.
Yeah, understanding that you know a lot more about your product and the job that they're trying to do is super important, right? Because you'll then start writing on your copy on your homepage that attracts you, but no one knows as much about the product as you do.
Yeah.
So, and the final thing you actually mentioned about the webinars, you still right now, so WebinarNinja has 14,000 customers. 14,000 customers. You're still running webinars for the community, right?
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I still do it because I need to still have a pulse on the direction of the company, who we're serving, who we want to go after. As the leader, as the CEO of the company, I think that's important because I need to make sure that we need to stay on vision, and also hear from our customers. We do monthly webinars for our members to talk about new releases, how to use the new features that we just released, talk about what's on a roadmap, that kind of thing. But it's also a chance for me to connect and hear what they're struggling with, what they need help with, whether it's training, whether it's support, whether it's a type of video they need or some sort of guidance, some sort of customer success path. It's really hard to do that if you don't put yourself out there. And to be honest with you, it's probably one of our differentiators at WebinarNinja is that both Nicole and I are known. People know who's behind the company. Versus a faceless brand or a name where they don't really understand the story behind it, and that has its disadvantages. It has its toll on us as part of the company, but it's helped us get to where we are today.
For sure. Fantastic. I just want to finish on one thought that came into my head is that one way of building a software company is you would think you're solving a problem, go and raise money, try and solve that problem, and maybe you solve it, maybe you don't. You lose a bit of control when you raise the money because you're giving away equity. But the way that you've kind of done it, which I think is so much better, is you can build an audience first, pre-sell, and also know that there's a real problem that you're solving before you then go and build it. So now you have this company that's growing, and you and Nicole, I presume, still have full control of everything that's happening. And so that is what I think you guys have done incredibly well. Omar, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And if there's any way I can help you in any way, let me know. Reach out. You got my email. I hope your audience got something out of today's discussion. And if they're looking for any help with webinars, they can reach out to me or check out webinarninja.com.
Okay, so here is what I love about Webinar Ninja and what Omar has done. Now, the first thing that I think is super amazing is that Omar and Nicole, actually, the other co-founder of Webinar Ninja, first, they are actually publishing content for the niche years before they even considered starting the product. So that podcast was called The $100 MBA. And actually in 2017, I think I did an episode on how to use virtual assistants. Anyway, this podcast, they've been grinding away at it for years, and they built a pretty considerable audience. And obviously during that time, they started to really understand who the types of person that they were helping with that content were, what their challenges were. And also then Omar himself had the challenges that Webinar Ninja then went on to solve because he was running, as he mentioned in the interview, webinars for that community. And so he first experienced the problems himself because he was experiencing them as a business owner. He also had a massive audience of people who actually had the same kind of challenge. And so he was able to choose something that was obviously more likely to succeed because he had first-hand and second-hand experience of the problem. Now, that's the first benefit of building an audience. But then obviously the second is when you do have something, or when you are going to start to build something, you can charge people for it before you've built it, or you can build it first and then charge people straight away. And so that is the first thing that Omar and Nicole have done incredibly well. And obviously, we're kind of replicating this with the growth of the SaaS Marketer media brand and then spinning off the Fame agency and Bcast podcast software from there. The second thing Omar and Nicole did incredibly well is they found a niche that was being underserved by the existing market. And I think we may have mentioned this in the interview, but if you look at the kind of almost legacy webinar software products, they were far too expensive, far too hard to create or to use to create webinars, and really almost archaic. And so what Omar and Nicole managed to do there was create something that was actually cheaper, much easier to use, and then were able to release that to their internal audience and then get feedback on the product, make it better, and then kind of scale from there. So they spotted that niche that was being underserved. The third thing, obviously, is something that we like to call user-led growth. Each person who starts the webinar with Webinar Ninja exposes the people that are coming onto their webinars to the software. And this is just absolutely beautiful. It really, if you don't have something like this in your growth trajectory, it is quite hard to bootstrap, because with every new customer Webinar Ninja get, they're getting that attention of the attendees of that person. And so there's also the affiliate, like a very realistic attempt or opportunity for affiliates for their customers, because they're showing Webinar Ninja to those webinar attendees anyway. So why not then also place a link and claim the commission? And so that's something that there are ways for all new SaaS companies to do that, but it's something that I think Webinar Ninja has done very well. So to summarize, they first built the audience, understood the challenges they were having. Second, they spotted a niche that was underserved. And then third, they integrated user-led growth. So if you are in the process of starting or have started a SaaS company, those are the three things that I would look at. And so with that, I want to thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It is my pleasure to record these episodes. And again, if you can leave a review on Apple, that would be amazing. Just ping me a screenshot, email it to tom@saasmarketer.io, and then I'll get you a shout out on the show. And as always, thank you so much for listening.